coming out on this really, really cold day, and we got the heater going late last night. We walked in here yesterday afternoon, and it was about 55 degrees. Makes it pretty chilly, so we just, once we got it working, we just turned it on full blast, and this mic will help, hopefully, because we can keep that going to make sure it stays warm enough but not too hot. Before we get started, just a couple of quick reminders. November is always kind of our membership drive thing, and we're always looking for another new member or so, and I think I saw Connie with her check too a while ago. Good reminder. But what we try to ask for memberships is like $10 for an individual or $20 per couple per family, and it goes to pretty good use, we think, and every dollar counts. So if you get a chance today to do that membership thing, that's great. Well, we're all here for a special occasion, and I mean this is a special occasion. And the reason I want to say this is a fellow by the name of Charlie Jackson had so much to do with us having many of our artifacts in this museum. And a little bit quickly about Charlie, and then we're going to go right to the source, Roland. Charlie, out at Kitterville area, clear back, we were in Hodgeman County then, were we? I think we'd been established as a county, but Charlie was an early inhabitant. And so what kind of happened then, he loved to collect artifacts, Indian artifacts. Now think back into the 70s, Roland?
Yeah.
Charlie Jackson was looking for artifacts. Now I bet all of us in here at one time or another have been looking for artifacts, okay? So think about that. He was finding things that I guarantee you wouldn't be laying there today with all the people out with the, what do we call them? Detectors, metal detectors. So he was collecting these items. Now, as Charlie was getting up in years, like all of us, getting up in years, a little bit of gray hair here, but proud of every one of them that I still have, Charlie was worried about what's going to happen to these artifacts. So in his will, he said, once I'm gone, I want these artifacts to belong to Hodgeman County. And I did not know this, but at one time in our courthouse, before this museum was established, there was an artifacts room. That's where those things went. Dorothy's shaking her head. She's a little bit older than I am, so she's allowed to shake her head.
Well, I lived in the courthouse, too.
Right.
Yeah.
She lived in the courthouse,
Yeah.
in fact. So, well, she wasn't in jail, but she may have slept in the jail.
I slept in jail, though.
Long story. Well, anyway, so that's how this came about. So when the Haun Museum came about, the artifacts came over here. So Charlie Jackson, God bless him, is a big part of us in this museum. So I've talked long enough. Roland Jackson, and Roland, of course, will tell you about his connection with Charlie. And I couldn't call him Charles. I don't know. I just always knew the name as Charlie Jackson. So Roland, I want to turn it over to you, and if you'll just kind of speak into this microphone, and then I know after he's talking, someone might have some questions, some might want to add to it.
Yeah.
So Roland, it's all yours, buddy. Thank you. Hey, introduce your guests too, okay?
Okay. I tell you what, I am so thrilled to be here and so honored to be asked to be here. And I have another honor. Some friends of mine that I've known.
Oh yeah, speak into that thing.
Is this better?
That's
Okay. Some friends of mine that I have known since '71. I worked with JB at Maywood there in Amarillo, and they're from Amarillo. And so JB and Patricia came to see this. This is JB and Patricia Sanderson. And anyway, I'm just so honored that they would come. So anyway, I would like to tell you, first of all, I was so blessed to have the most wonderful granddad and grandma that told me all about the old days. And my granddad would come and he would pick me up there at the farm, and we would go out and cake the cattle. That's what he called it, cake the cattle. And so we'd go out and give the cattle the pellets that they ate, and he would take me around and just tell me about the old days. And there is so much, I was young, but there is so much that I wish I could remember, I wish I had recorded. But anyway, in being asked to do this, it kind of helped me think, and I just kind of recall some things that my granddad told me. So anyway, my great grandfather was he was such an awesome fella, and my granddad loved him and was so impressed by all that he did. I mean, he was just, anyway, Granddad had nothing but really positive things for, and so that's how I got to know my great grandfather, Charles Jackson. This is through my granddad. Charlie Jackson, his name was Charlie Humphrey Jackson. Humphrey was my great grandfather's father's name. And so us Jacksons, we kind of get named after our relatives, and I'm named after my granddad, Roland Lee Jackson. So anyway, it's a privilege for that. I'll call my great grandfather Charlie because that's what he was known by, but he was born March 28, 1857, and in Freeport, Illinois. And his parents were Humphrey and Dorothy Jackson. And he had three brothers. The first brother, Brother Frank, died in infancy. And then Joseph and Walter was the two other brothers. And of course, my dad, Kenny Jackson, was named Kenny Walter Jackson after Granddad's brother. But great-grandfather spent his childhood in Elgin, Illinois. And he got his education from the Elgin Academy in Elgin, Illinois. And then he went to Racine College, I hope I'm saying that right, in Racine, Wisconsin. Now just think how far he had to go to college from Illinois to Wisconsin. But anyway, one of the things that he was so proud of is that he became a drummer boy in the Abraham Lincoln's drummer corps. And yeah, he was so proud of that. But anyway, he was 21 years old when he decided to move to Hodgeman County. And he got here in March of 1878. And he homesteaded here at the farm. The reason he homesteaded where he did was because of the water. That's where the Hackberry dumps into the Pawnee. And he built dug his dugout right there. And so the rock is still there. It's caved in, but the rock is still there. But anyway, this dugout was approximately, the best I can tell, 20 by 30 foot. And yes, well, it was for then. But just think, 5 people lived there. 5. My great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, my granddad, his sister, Inez, and younger brother, Frank. And so, anyway, that was, and everything they ate, they either had to catch or trap or shoot. I mean, no freezer, so it was just amazing how that worked, you know. And my granddad told me about the early days when he trapped, and some of the money that he made from trapping was furs, and so that was kind of how they made it. And when the family went to, and of course they had to go either by horse or a wagon, but when they went to Jetmore, they would go one day, spend the night at the motel, and then come back. And so, anyway, before my great-grandfather was married, he on his way down, he had got a wagon, and he had 2 horses and a wagon. Now, this is what my grandfather told me. And one night, he heard some noise out, and he looked out, and there were 2 Indians that had got on his horses, and they were both galloping away. And of course, the Indian reservation was in the area, and so they had escaped the Indian reservation. So anyway, my great granddad, of course, he's in his early 20s, but he had to walk to Jetmore, to get another horse, and no money, you know. I mean, he had to, you know, to get somebody to trust him, and he brought another horse back. And so that was something that he went through, and through his life there, he did have trouble with the Indians coming and stealing things. And so anyway, in 1884, November 5th, 1884, he married the love of his life, and that was my great-grandmother. And he and her lived in that dugout, and that's when my granddad was born in 1885, and then his sister came along in 1888, and then his youngest brother, came along in 1895. And so anyway, they lived there all together. Granddad said that he thought that my great-grandfather wanted to build a house, and so they were making the highway between Jetmore and Garden City, and there were a couple of houses in the way. And so my great-grandfather bought those houses, and he moved them by horseback out to the farm. Now, I'm sure that he had to go, you know, around about, because there were hills and things that they had to climb. And in the old house, there were pictures of that. And of course, the horses, I mean, they were just almost as far as you could see, hooked together. Then there's the house, and the house set on logs. And they had logs in front and logs here, so the horses would move up, and then all these guys would grab the logs and put them in front, and then the horses would move up again, and then they'd do it again. They did that twice. Now, you know, and just think about all the hills and the valleys that they had to either go around. It would have been pretty tough for them to go up, and there were no roads. It was all pasture. Of course, no fences. And so anyway, so they brought those houses out, and that was about 1908. And so anyway, I've always been impressed about the improvements that my great-grandfather did back then, and you know, and I saw them there when I was a kid. But one of the things that he did is he had a well dug, a hand-dug well, kind of like the big well in Greensburg. And it, you know, you look down there, and it had rock around the walls, and it's still there. It's still there. Then the other thing that was pretty awesome was he had a carbide generator that he put in. He put carbide in it, and that furnished gas for his lights, his lamps. And I mean, I would think that would be pretty dangerous, but now, but anyway, I remember the pipes. Granddad pointed out the pipes to me that went into to one. They didn't have it all over the house, just in a room or so. And anyway, that carbide generator is still there. Now the top is off of it, and it's kind of filled up with dirt, so it's hard to see exactly what was inside there. But anyway, that was pretty neat. Then he had made a I guess you could call it a swimming pool. It looked kind of like it, but it was rock. And what he would do is he had a windmill on the well that he dug, and this windmill would pump water into that pool. and he used that to water his garden and other things that he needed water for. You know, he just go in and dip it and carry it into the house. But anyway, that was, like I say, that mostly what he watered his garden with. And in time, you know, he got a bathtub. Now there at the house, he had two cellars. One went underneath the house, and then the other one was dug, and it had the wash house on top of it. And so the one underneath the house, you go down there, and there was this bathtub, and it had, like the old bathtubs, it had kind of the claws, looked like claws on it. And then at the front of the bathtub, they had this big tank, and it had a burner below it, and it run off kerosene. And so they would have to go out and get water out of the tank, pour water in there, and I don't know how many gallons it was, but it had to be like 10 or 15. Light the fire, the kerosene fire, and heat the water, and then they would take a bath in there. And so the only thing that I don't know is how did he get the water out of there? He must have had to dip it out and take it out and pour it out. But anyway, I remember seeing that and just amused by it. I wish it could be in this museum now. I mean, it was just amazing. But anyway, the other cellar, it had the wash house on it, and that's where they did their washing, of course, the clothes. And even my mother had used that when they first come. So one day, I don't know, I was probably 5, maybe 6, around in there. Oh, by the way, I'm going to tell you this, but please don't let it out because I'll get in bad trouble. But so I'm trusting you, okay? But I was in there, and lo and behold, there were some matches there on the shelf that came out of my dad's pocket. And I took the match, and I thought, I struck it. It struck, and I thought, boy, that's pretty good. So I threw it on the ground, struck it again. Anyway, I struck all those matches, lit them. And then Mother called and wanted me to go take a nap. And so I went in the house, and I remember this really well. I went into the house, took my nap, and then I heard all this noise, yelling, and got up, and that wash house was on fire. It was burning. And so that was the first fire. And let's see, I can't remember the guy's name that started it. Let's see, what was his name? But anyway, it's still the cellar was still in good shape. It had a cement floor and a roof, and so my mother stored all the vegetables and cans and things down there. So that was there. But back to the house. One of the things that my great grandfather did is with the house is he used it kind of like a bed and breakfast. Now this is what my grandfather told me, that people coming through could stay there. My great grandfather would bed them overnight, feed their horses, and he had a huge barn that he used. And then there were some lawmen that came through, and there in the middle of the house there's what he called the dark room, and it had no windows in it, and the door, it only had one door, and the door had lock on the outside. So when lawmen came through, why, they would take the prisoners, put them in the dark room, and then, and then when they'd spend the night and then leave. So anyway, I remember that when I was a kid, and it was our storage room, and it had a lot of artifacts, facts, and things that my great grandfather had collected in there. Wow, what I would give to be able to see that again. But anyway, up in the attic is where a lot of his things ended up that he collected. And Dorothy and I were just talking about the cabinet, display cabinet up there that had the butterflies and the insects, and they were all pinned in there, and then underneath had the name of them. He just had kind of every insect known to man in there, it seemed like. And then there were other lots of other relics in there. But anyway, and this is kind of something probably we need to keep quiet too, because I get in big trouble. But I was up there in the attic one day. I was young. I saw this phone, and it had a ringer on it. And so I brought it down, and I was playing with it in the yard. And my granddad said, what are you doing with that? He says, well, why don't you you need to take that back. And so did I? No. I took it to the granary, and there was a ladder there, so I climbed up. The granary we had wheat in there, and I climbed up, got in there, and I was able to put that phone up in the rafters. And so it stayed there all those years. When I moved out, I think it was probably 205, 206 around in there, I got to thinking about that, and I went out, looked up, there it was. And it was just completely covered with mud daubers. You couldn't even tell what it was. So I took it down, and I cleaned it all up, and I was amazed. It was a Montgomery Ward brand. And that Granddad told me that was the first phone that they had out there. And so I have it hanging in my wall now at the house. And every time I walk by that, I want to say, hello, hello. But anyway, there were quite a few buildings. One was a chicken house. It was made out of rock, and it's still there, and it still has stuff in it. However, it is getting really... The roof is getting really old. I mean, when the wind blows, the tin blows off, and So anyway, but it's still there. And then, of course, I told you about the granary. It's still there, but it's getting pretty leany. And we had this big barn, and it was huge, and it had a hayloft, big hayloft in it. And our milk cow was named Boss. And so Boss and I became friends, and I would go out and milk her twice a day. And so anyway, I had wonderful memories of that barn. Anyway, and then another building was a building that the hired men slept in. Now, great-grandfather, when he first started, he did all the work himself. And one of the things, he was one of the first to plant wheat. And the way he planted wheat was on the back of a horse, and he broadcast it, and that's the way he planted it. But in later years, he basically hired people to run the farm, and they slept in that house, that little house. And I remember the little shelves, the beds that they laid on. And Anyway, it sadly, I think the termites have took a toll on it and it fell down. But it had so many memories in it. But anyway, the other thing that my grandfather told me about was the ice house. Now, in behind the chicken house, there was a ledge, and that ice house was dug out back behind it, and it was lined with rock. And what my granddad told me is that in the winter, the hired men would go to the creek, cut blocks of ice out, and they'd put it in that ice house. Now, I don't know how that worked out, but I don't think it worked out good because, of course, maybe back then we had cold weather all the time. But anyway, that was kind of interesting to know that, that's what they used that for. And of course, the rock is still there. It's caved in. But one of the things that my great-grandfather did is he decided to irrigate and started irrigating. And I don't know if he was the first one or not. But basically, in 1919 is when they built the Jackson Dam. And that's on V Road. And it crosses the Pawnee. And so that was the dam that he built. And it's still there. It's got, of course, the creek is empty, so it's in retirement now, I guess you'd say. But anyway, the other thing that I wanted to mention was, all the rock that's around the place. Rock houses, rock posts, and my great-grandfather had rock quarries, and that was south of his house. And that's where they would get a lot of the rock. And according to my granddad, what they would do is they would go out there and they had those bracing bits, and they'd by hand, and they'd put holes in the rock, and then they'd take a chisel and they'd hammer the chisels and it'd crack the rock, and that's the way they got it out. And of course, they didn't have any kind of hydraulic equipment, so they had to pull it with a horse. And so they drug that rock around it. And if you look all over the country back there, there's many rock fence posts. There was just a bunch of that. It's just amazing. I don't know how many people that would take to do that. But one thing that my great-grandfather did, there were no fences back then, and so all the cattle ran together. And Granddad was telling about how, to get the cattle to market, they drove them to Dodge City, to the railroad. And my great-grandfather decided to build what we call the rock corral. And that rock corral is where they drove all the cattle, because they run together. Everybody's cattle run together. And then that way, each cow, they determined what calf was hers, and they'd brand it with the right brand, so they could separate the cows and the calves. And so, anyway, that rock corral was just, it was just amazing. And then we got some oil thumping and fracking, and this was a few years ago, so it broke and it started to fall down. Whole north end's out of it now. It breaks my heart. But there was a lot of memories there, and at the entrance on the south side of the stone corral, there was a scale, and it was, I'm just having to guess because I can't remember, but I think it was about the floor of it, and it was kind of in the ground, but the floor of it was probably about 7 or 8 foot wide and about 10 foot long, if I remember right. And they had this big scale there. It was brass, and it was hanging there. And so, I don't know, it was probably in the 80s, maybe, or thereabouts. That scale was just standing there. And so I got the scale, and I made a bracket for it. I hung it in the house. And then, anyway, it was just a memo that I looked at. I enjoyed it. But one of the things that my great-grandfather did is he was secretary of the Cattle Association. And I remember in Grandma's house, Grandma and Granddad's house, that there was a thick book. It was about like this by that, and that's where all of his notes were in from the meetings. And my great-grandfather wrote in kind of cursive, and it was a little hard. You had to kind of really look at it to be able to tell what it was saying. But there in that book, or in that log, he told about during a meeting, two cattlemen got into it and argued. And so they went outside and they had a shootout. And I was thinking, what would that happen if that happened today? But anyway, also, one of the things that my great-grandfather did, the very first tractor that he bought, according to my granddad, was a Fordson, and he bought it in 1920. And he was really against tractors because he was a horse guy. But anyway, that was the very first one. Another thing that I found that was just amazing. There was a book that I found, and it was in the building where the hired hands slept. And there was a big wooden chest there, and I opened it up, and it was just clear full of books. But this one caught my eye, and it was called The Life and Times of Billy Dixon. And so I took that back to Amarillo, and it was just clear full of notes and comments and things that my great-grandfather had written in it. And so that really spurred my attention. So I read that, and Billy Dixon started out when he was a kid. He became a guide for people going to California on the gold rush. After that, he became a buffalo hunter. And then he started up north, and he worked his way down hunting buffalo. And when he got to Kansas, one of the places where he spent the summer was at the mouth of the Hackberry. Now that was before my great-grandfather dug his dugout, but in the book it tells about him staying at the mouth of the Hackberry. And my grandfather, all the way through, he just made comments and notes. And then he moved on, went through Guyman. There was another place, I'm getting old, can't remember the name, but it was a place in Texas where he became the sheriff. And so he was the sheriff there. And then he died, and his wife wrote this book. And so I was just so tickled with it, so proud of it. And one thing that I haven't told you, sadly, in 1961, the house that the houses that he brought out there burned, caught fire and burned. And so all those antiques up in the attic were gone. And so, but my grandma and granddad at their house, which is just a little bit south and west of the original house, they had a lot of my great-grandfather's paperwork. And it also had some really neat things where, you know, he in this picture here, it showed him with the fur coat on. That was in there. They had an Angora Shap in there that had long hair on it. It was different. My dad was really proud of that. But anyway, it had all kinds of stuff. Plus, it had some guns. in it that belonged to my great-grandfather. Now, let me stop there and let me share this with you. When great-grandfather died and willed his stuff to the Hodgeman County, and they were over in the courthouse, I remember a big chest kind of out in front that had a lot of guns in it, rifles and things like that. Sadly, that got stolen, and so that was really sad. But anyway, not only did the original house burn, but then in 2001, Grandma and Granddad's house burned, and we lost all that. And so I was so blessed that I had a friend that had found a letter that my great-grandfather had written my granddad, and that was when he toward the end of his life, when he went to Dodge to the hospital. And I wanted to read that to you. And I have that hanging on my house at home. The actual letter, the actual envelope and everything. But he was at St. Anthony's Hospital in Dodge City, Kansas, and this was July 1st, 1931. And the letter says, "Dear Lee, I am better some ways, but feel pretty bummed. Clyde is a good worker, and I don't think I could get a man and woman to beat them as they seem to take an interest. But I want you to manage for me. I watch my horse and ranch." And then I'm assuming that he's talking about Clyde. It says he may take a notion to vamoose and may overheat if too hot. I didn't understand that, but anyway, that's what. And he said if he turns the herd south, have him fix all the fence tights, or they will get in the corn, and that is hell. And then he says, put my share of Timken's wheat in the red granary. You can use the barn instead of piling it on the ground as we did in my cattle shed. Save all you can because it's getting higher. It's going higher. And it says, fix my bank account. Save 3 of the best bull calves. Don't overwork. Let John do it. Love you and love you, or love you all. That's what he says. And he says, lots of friends call, and I have everything to make me comfortable. And then it says, right, Dad. Well, that was in 1931, and just a few. It wasn't that long later. He did come home, but he died, and and I remember my grandfather telling me about they had the doctor here in Jetmore, and they were able to contact him, and the doctor rode his horse out, but he got there too late. And so my great-grandfather was dead when he got there. But my great-grandfather always wanted to be buried on the hill overlooking the ranch. And so my granddad built his grave there, and he put rock around it, and it's still there. And there's a guy that lives there. Let's see, what's his name? I think his name's Roland. Anyway, Roland is supposed to take care of that grave, and he does the best he can, but sometimes he forgets. But I'm not forgetting now. So, so anyway, one of the things that I wanted to do, I want to read his actual obituary, and then I want to read another article out of the Jetmore Republican that was wrote. And so here is the obituary. It says, Jackson to be buried on hill near farm. Charlie Jackson, the father of Southwest Kansas wheat, before his death at his ranch, Camp Wilderness, 17 miles northwest of Jetmore, Friday, selected as his last resting place the highest point on the ranch, and he will be laid to rest on a preliminary overlooking Camp Wilderness. The home he made 54 years ago. Mr. Jackson's only home since leaving that of his parents in Illinois more than half a century ago. It was Camp Wilderness. It was at the home to which he took his bride in 1886, 8 years after he had staken claim, and when he had taken his bride, who was the first school teacher in Jetmore in Hodgeman County. Their 2 sons and daughter were born and reared there. It was the place he selected for a home in 1878 when he had the greater part of the western half of Kansas in which to make his choice. 2 sons, daughter survive. Mr. Jackson is survived by his sons, Lee G. Jackson, living in an adjoining ranch in Hodgeman County, Frank E. Jackson of Norton, Kansas, and a daughter, Mrs. Inez Heldman, in Norwood, Colorado. A brother, Walter Jackson, is in Frisco, California, also survives him. Mrs. Jackson died several years ago at Camp Wilderness. The story of Mr. Jackson is a story of the drummer boy for Abraham Lincoln, who became a wealthy Kansas landowner, carrying the romance of the prairies, the thrills of pioneering, and the distinction of being the first to grow wheat in what is now the largest wheat producing area in the world. He was born near Elgin, Illinois, 74 years ago. His father had been west. The family stake was made in the California Gold Rush when the father was a younger man. The stake grew to a fortune and was lost in the Chicago fire when Mr. Jackson was a student at Elgin Academy in Elgin. As a boy, he had been a member of Abraham Lincoln's own drum corps. Also, a boy, he had heard tales of his father tell the story of unsettled West. After his graduation and finding suitable employment hard to get, he decided to investigate the West. He came without money. He had a small fortune of $400 that had been amassed by rearing livestock at the home of his mother and father, and had changed the small, that word is unreadable, as he made them to the gold. And after the Civil War, the gold nearly had doubled in value. He went to his home and gave the most of his $400 to his parents and announced that he was leaving. "Where are you going?" they asked. "You have told me that there is a place out west where no one lives and there were plenty of room. I'm going out there to take the country." His ownership in 5,000 acres of the land where no one lived attested to the fact that he did take the country. Mr. Jackson arrived in Larned, Kansas in 1878. It was the outpost of civilization. He had a small amount of money, which he bought a team of horses, and a dealer trusted him for a wagon. He managed to get a little food supply and started west in search of a place to build a home. Eventually he came to the rolling terrain of Hodgeman County and the beautiful valley of the Pawnee. Searching for the source of its abundant water supply, he came upon what seemed completely to fill his desire for retreat, and there he staked his claim 54 years ago, and that was Camp Wilderness. Indians were his neighbors. The only neighbors were a few Indians intent on primarily stealing everything they could from the white man. Soon they had nearly all of his possessions. They drove away his horses, and with another horse he managed to turn some sod and planted the first grains of the cereal crop. That since has made this country famous. He broadcast the wheat seed riding a horse. Then, with a crude tea harrow of his own manufacture, he dragged at the end of the lariat and he dragged the seed under the soil. The next few years, he experienced every thrill, hazard, hardship known to pioneering in the Kansas plains. He was further removed from companionship and incidentally help than most of the other pioneers. Then there's a letter in the Jetmore, or an article in the Jetmore Republican. I just have to read that to you. It's entitled, Our Own Charlie Jackson. Camp Wilderness is the name given a cattle ranch located 16 miles northwest of Jetmore in Hodgeman County. As a young man of 20, Charles Jackson, with a little more than his diploma from the Elgin Academy in Elgin, Illinois, left to seek employment. He arrived in Larned, Kansas in 1878 with a small amount of money, which he bought a team of horses. The dealer trusted him for a wagon. He managed to get a small supply of food, set out in search of a place to build the home. He traveled west and finally coming to the Pawnee Valley, where he staked his claim and called his home Camp Wilderness. Unfortunately, his only human neighbors were Indians who stole practically everything from him, including one of two horses. With the other, he broke out the sod and raised the first wheat ever grown that far west. He had broadcast the grain while riding horseback and harrowed it by using a small, crudely built tea harrow, which he pulled at the end of a lariat, thus dragged the seed on the soil. 8 years later, he married the first school teacher in Jetmore. While visiting Charlie, the writer noticed a drawing of a buffalo hanging on the wall. When asked if he had more artwork, Charlie produced a score of pencil drawings of birds, animals, and flowers of the prairie that were repeatedly very well done. Through the years, Charlie collected a remarkable group of curios and relics. 1,500 arrowhead and spearheads constituted one collection. He had teepee poles, which he had picked up after the Indians had made camp on his place. Mounted birds, animals, reptiles, insects, and a number that numbered into the hundreds. Guns, war drums, swords, knives were also another exhibit. A storeroom was filled up to overflowing with more relics and curios. When Charlie was raising cattle on a large scale, he commented to a friend that he was short of feed. When the friend replied, "Why don't you break up some of that pasture?" Charlie had 1,120 acres of native sod immediately south of the house. "Because," he replied, "this is too close to civilization as close to civilization as I can now come with me on the south." Charlie ranked his trees as an accomplishment. He was most proud of an immense cottonwood stand in his backyard, a tree that he had planted from a seed. 2 water elms grew nearby to illustrate Charlie's love of nature. A friend relates this story. Indians had pitched their teepees at Camp Wilderness. My granddad told me this too, by the way. Carelessly, they built a fire around one of the valuable trees. The smoldering blaze was threatening the plant's life when Jackson noticed it. Rushing out, he chased the Indians away and in his bare feet stamped out the fire around the base of the tree. His feet were badly burned and scarred, but he had saved the life of a precious thing and made no complaint as to the price. His ranch was a watering place and an oasis on the Texas Trail over which herds of cattle were taken north. Then, when Charlie died, he was buried on the highest point on his ranch on a plim overlooking the Camp Wilderness, his home for 54 years. Then it's the Jetmore Republican. One thing that I wanted to add to the tree story, my great-grandfather only went back home one time in his entire life, and that took a wagon, and he went back to the Illinois to visit his family. And while he was there, he gathered trees. And some of the trees that he gathered were locust trees, 3 different kinds. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm so happy he brought 2 of them back, but the third one I wished he would left. That's the one with all the thorns. But anyway, he planted those kind of in a line, east to west, and back on the north side of his house. And I remember that when I was a kid, and being told about it, and now it is huge. I mean, it's just everywhere. The trees have just increased. There weren't a lot of trees in the Pawnee in that area. Actually, my granddad said none. But you know, he planted trees, and so now there's lots of trees. So anyway, but this concludes what I had to say about my grandfather. Dorothy, would you like to? Do you have anything you'd like to add? Dorothy, by the way, lived twice out at the ranch, and her dad, Francis Sinclair, and Elma, her mother, are just precious friends of ours, and they ended up farming the ranch when I was a kid. So anyway, is there something you would like to add?
Well, I got a few things, but they might not be too interesting. I don't know.
There you go. Thank you.
But Dad did work for them twice. The next time I was older, and I didn't get a horse like I wanted it, so I had an old milk cow I used as a horse. But we had a lot of fun. We used to dam up underneath the spillway on the Jackson Dam when the water was up a little bit, and the boys would take a 55-gallon barrel down there and fill it with fish. Take it home. We had fish forever. I don't know if Mom appreciated it or not, because she had to clean them. She got Dad to help, but the kids didn't. But we enjoyed it, and all the things he's talking about, the different places that we wasn't allowed to go in and look over, we did. It was like I don't know, it was like going to a museum outside. I don't know how that man thought of all the inventions he had, but it was wonderful. And I appreciate everything the Jacksons have done for my family. Croma and Jackson Ranch means a lot to the Sinclairs. And I'm glad to be here.
Tell about that room.
Oh, that room. As he called it, they didn't have no windows. And it was a cold room, so Mom could put a lot of stuff in there because it wasn't heated. Well, to get to my bedroom, my sister and I slept together. You had to go across that scary place. By then, Mom had a curtain on it because somebody had tore down part of it. And so by the time I hit the door to go to the bedroom, the time I got in the bed, it was like flash lightning. I just knew all kinds of creepy people were in that. And to this day, I think about that. My sister thought it was funny, and of course she would listen to really spooky things on the radio just to make me feel scareder. She was the oldest and I was the youngest. And one day my mom was making head cheese, and I don't know how many people remember head cheese. And I was sick, didn't go to school, and Dad was talking to me in the bedroom. Pretty soon we heard boom. Went out there, and the little thing on top, the little pressure thing got stuck, blew the lid off. And it just looked like, I don't know, them little stalagmites, everything hanging down all over the kitchen. Mom just started crying, and Dad, he said, oh, that's not bad. But it took days and days and weeks of washing, and then you started all over and washed again. They got clear down to the nitty-gritty because paint wouldn't stay on it. They worked on that for weeks. To this day, my kids have said, Mom, why don't you use pressure cookers? And I said, no, I've been there. So we have a lot of good memories. We did a lot of fishing. One day, my 2 uncles who lived down the road a little ways, Charlie and Mervyn, came in their Model A It was kind of like a roadster. It had 2 seats though, but no top. Put us all in there, and we went up on the hill where your grandpa's buried. And Charlie said, I think we could take this thing down through a rocky point, and it was straight down, water, and then a jump up on a cliff on the other side. Ernie says, well, I don't know. I don't think maybe you can do it. He said, I bet I can. So he backed up. We went down that hill. I can still remember. It was just like flying. Hit the water. Water went everywhere. And that thing jumped up just enough to get the front end on the other side. When Mom and Dad heard that, not only did they get in trouble, we did too. And one time Dad came home. Mom said, where's the boys? He said, I threw them in the creek. She said, why did you do that? He said, well, it's the same swimming hole my dad threw me in. Either you swim or you drowned. My gosh, I never seen an early get so mad in her life. She like to blew up because her boys was gone. But that's the way they did. And my dad got the same thing. My grandpa, when he came home one day, my grandma Pearl said, where's the boys? And he said, I threw them in the creek. He said, why? She said, why? Well, he said, they'll either swim or drown, and out here you better learn to swim. So it still keeps going down from one generation to the other. So, thank you.
Roland, is your great-grandfather's grave?
Here, go ahead, here.
Is there a placard or anything there?
One of our things we want, I'll let Roland talk more about this, but one of the things we wanted to do at one time, we thought maybe the weather would be a little bit warmer. So I promised my brother-in-law Eugene that before the rattlesnakes come back, that our hope is to go out on a Sunday afternoon and let Roland, I'll let him talk about it. Go ahead.
Yes, there's a lot to show out there, and but yeah, that when when you go out there, you just kind of amazed, but you think, stuff, everybody goes through this in life. It can't last forever. And so, anyway, now what was the question again?
About the
She
grave
just showed us
marker.
the fence around the grave.
Gotcha,
Thank you.
gotcha. That fence was there, and it's got it had a plaque on the outside of the fence that had it was made out of brass. And anyway, I think it was Francis, your dad, that said, I think somebody's trying to steal that, and I went up there, and sure enough, it was they didn't take the plaque, but they tried. And so anyway, I went ahead and took the plaque off, and I still have it. Now, why haven't I put a stone out there? I guess I don't know. I can't tell you. But I plan on taking that plaque that was there that has Charles Jackson on it, and I want to make it have a regular monument, a stone monument with that exact writing on there, and put it in there, and then maybe take the original plaque and give it to the museum. And so, but anyway, that was something that we were lucky about. But probably some of the most precious memories that I have is me and my granddad going up and mowing the lawn up there. Now, I'm not exactly sure where he's buried. I think it's in the southwest corner of the rock ledge, or the rock. But anyway, it's I look up there and it just gives me a warm feeling all the time. But I'll be honest with you, my granddad in later years told me that he had wished a number of times that he would have buried great-grandfather in town with his mother, But that is a thought of mine. You know, what's going to happen when I'm not there anymore? What's going to happen? Can the farm stay in the Jackson family from now on? That's up in the air. And then what's going to happen to my great grandfather's grave? You know, but I notice there's a number of places around that you drive by, and there is out in the country graves. You know, and so maybe it'll be that way. Anyway, it's a wonderful place. Now, you know, in there it talked about my great grandfather. His came up to 5,000 acres that he owned altogether, and of course, when he died, it was divided into thirds. And my grandmother, or my grandfather's sister and her husband, the Hellmans, they got where the Patchins live now. And they actually built that rock house where the Patchins are, and they were so proud of it. But then the 30s came, and you know they couldn't raise any wheat. I mean, the dust was blowing, and so my aunt's husband says, "We're out of here," and they moved to Colorado. And so anyway, the land went back to the bank, and then on the other part of the farm had what they call the stone ledge, and that was just a precious part of the farm. It belonged to my granddad's brother, Frank, and that stone ledge, they built a crossing from it, and a lot of the neighbors, we'd gather there and just have picnics and fish and what have you. But up there in the top of the ledge, there was an embankment, a hole, a cave, you might say. And my granddad told me the Indians dug that out and used to be there, but it overlooked the whole farm. But anyway, my granddad's brother Frank, he ended up in Colorado, and of course that land was sold. And but when I go by there, I look at it and I think about all the memories that we used to have out there, going through that. One of the things that my grandfather used to tell me about was how the neighbors were. They were so, I mean, neighbors helped neighbors, and and well, even when I was a kid, that was that way, you know. And then we got TV, and then everybody got to watching TV. And now, I mean, our neighbors are there, and they're there if we need them, but we don't see them all that much sometimes. But anyway, times change, and so. But anyway, does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to ask? Okay.
Yeah, talk a little bit about the current day.
The what?
Talk a little bit about the current day operation. Do you raise cattle yourself?
Actually, what we have done, my mother actually had the control of the farm, and she wanted Francis and Elma on there, and so Francis and Elma got on the farm.
They was there long after I was married.
Yes, and they were there, and they used to come. I was living in Texas at the time, and they came to visit us a few times with Mother, and they were just the best. And so, and Francis also was one to tell me about the old days when he was there, and so, but yeah, and so now, we lease it out. We lease it to Josh and Melissa and us, and we just love them. They just do great, and I would love to raise cattle, but at my age, I don't think I want to go in that kind of debt, and so there's a learning curve too. So we lease the pasture out to Josh and Melissa, and as for me, I moved from Amarillo to the farm where my grandma and granddad lived. I'd been taking care of that house all those years. And I moved there, I think it was like in April. And I got to live there until December 27th. And Dorothy is the one that called me. I was in Amarillo getting my stuff, and Dorothy called me and said, well, the house is on fire. Couldn't believe it. Could not believe it. And so we'd been up all day loading the truck to bring the stuff from Amarillo back to the farm. And there are friends helping us. Says, no, you don't need to be on the road. He says, you're too, you've been up too long. So anyway, we spent the night in Amarillo and then got up real early the next morning and came home. And I remember coming over the hill, and there's the house, and 2/3 of it, the roof was gone, and it started on the west side. There was a porch there, a covered porch, and it started there. And the fire department was able to get it all put out except for, well, they got it put out. But so I got there, just couldn't believe. I went in, and you could go through the house upstairs, and everything was pretty much there. But you could see sky. And so, let's see, what did I say first? Oh yeah, it was my precious computer. I saved my computer, brought it out, and then I went to bring some of the other stuff out, and people started hollering at me, get out of there, get out of there. The basement had reignited, and so I got out of there, and I got to stand outside and took pictures of it while it burned the rest of the way down. But yeah, it was devastating, and then so I had to decide what I'm going to do. Am I going to just give up my dream and move off, or am I going to stay here? So I decided to stay. And while in Amarillo, I had started designing power steering for older farm tractors, and so I was able to continue that. And while the big house, while grandparents' house burned, the chicken house where I was building steering at the time didn't, and so I was building steering over there, and we found a house to rent way over by way far away, and anyway I would go to drive to the ranch, the house, and build steering. And then one day, went over there, and somebody had broken in and stole all my stuff. And so I thought, I'm going to have to give this up. And then I thought, no, I'm not. So, but we found a house in Garden City, and we bought it. It was actually a double wide, and the company was going to a different brand. And so that was kind of their show home and their show building. And so we bought that, and they hauled it out in one piece. And so I got to set it right on the banks of the Pawnee, where you could look this way and see the Pawnee, and you could look that way and see the Pawnee, where it made a curve. And so it's been my belief that, out of every bad thing that happens to us in life, there's always good that comes from it, and all we have to do is wait. And good will come from it, and you can look at it, and even though that house burning was just a disaster to me, it actually turned positive because I was able to live where I'd always wanted to live, in the very spot that I'd always wanted to live. So anyway, been out there. We brought that there in 2003, so I've been there ever since, and the Lord's blessed me with lots of fun in the shop building steering, and so it's been a wonderful thing. And I wish I could go up there and say, all right, great granddad Charlie, look what we've done. But the only thing is all the stuff that he built when he was alive, it's pretty much gone. And so, but anyway, like I say, the Lord's blessed me, and I feel very blessed, and I'm so glad that that I get to live where I've always wanted to live. So,
That corral, did everybody in the community brought their cattle over there?
yes, everybody did.
That was the
yeah.
only corral. And then when they wasn't there, us kids played in that. That was an
Yes.
awesome place.
It
The
was.
walls was all rock, high.
Yeah. And I'll tell you a little something that happened
It
to
was like
me.
a fort. Yeah, that's what we used it for.
My dad and they were working cattle, and I was sitting on the top of the rock, and it was way up there. I mean, way up there. And I was sitting up there watching them, and they were dehorning, and the cows were going, "Bleh!" and then the blood would squirt, and I mean, it really got me. And I started screaming and crying. I had to go to the house. Oh man, that was tough. But yeah, a lot of precious memories. A lot of precious memories there. It's just so sad that corral has fallen down now. I wish I had the money to put it back. Yeah,
That was something.
yeah. It was.
Roland, one thing, you talk about the corral and the Texas Trail, there's a lot of, I see the Warners here and Holman's, a lot of interest in that. They actually used to call it the Great Western, but the actual name is the Western Cattle Trail that went north. That was probably, you were talking about the Texas Trail, that was probably right in that area as they were heading north,
Yeah.
where you're talking about, maybe that corral area, I don't know, but right through your place.
Well, I just remember my granddad telling me that that when he was a kid there was no fences. I mean, none. Everybody's cattle ran together, and so that was one way that they were able to sort and find out who. And then of course they drove them to Dodge City to the train station, and then I think later on Jetmore developed a trade, and they had a corral in Jetmore, and they drove them there. So, and I remember that corral in Jetmore, the train station. So, yeah. Any more questions?
Could you talk a little bit more about the scale you were talking about? What
Okay.
era was that, and what were they using it for?
Well, I know that they were weighing cattle, and I think at the time, do you remember that scale when you were there? It was kind of in the ground, but it had a frame around it.
Was
And
it a Fairbanks?
Uh,
Did it have a name on it?
I don't know the name of it, but it did have the scale itself was about this long. It was made out of brass, and it had the little it had a ball here, and it was at the house, Grandma and Granddad's house, when it burned, and so it's still there. It's just under the ashes. The other thing that I forgot to tell you about was the branding iron that my great-grandfather had. And it was unusual. The brand, instead you'd think it'd be Charlie Jackson or, Camp Wilderness, but it wasn't. The brand was T-H-E, the. That was the brand, the, T-H-E. And I had it on the wall of my house for a lot of years, and then I brought it to the farm, and it is in the ashes. So down the line, maybe if I get new knees directly, why? Maybe I'll go down there.
Have a digging party for you.
I was
Yes,
gonna say, have us all come out and dig.
that's right. That's right. But there's still a lot of stuff in there that I haven't even tried to get. But one day I would like to. Maybe if I get my son. My son's a workaholic, so I'm going to have to do some talking. But maybe he'll come out and help me. So yeah. But there's stuff all along that I remember, and the heating of the house. That was kind of something I remember. I had some of the round top stove, and that was in the dark room, that round top stove, and it was just stored in there. And so I took it and I had it over at the at Grandma and Granddad's house, and it burned. And somebody came and got it, even though it was burned. So, yeah. One thing too that I wanted to tell you about. My grandfather loved to hunt deer, and so he would go to Colorado every year to hunt deer. There were no deer in Kansas, and so anyway, every year when he came back and he had horns, he would put them in the barn down north of the house, and he had all those deer horns up there, deer racks. And then he died in 1966, and guess what? 1967, I saw my first deer out there. It was a doe and her little baby. And so now they're everywhere.
Didn't they have some kind of heads in that house at one time, stuffed heads?
Yes, they did.
That scared me to death.
Yes, they
The
did.
first time we lived there, I wasn't very old, and
Yeah,
I was scared of them.
What's
yeah.
Stuffed heads of animals and stuff, and
They-
horns on them.
Yeah, they had, I know they had an owl that was stuffed.
Yeah.
I know they had
It's like a zoo.
prairie chickens, where it was a big thing back then. My great grandfather, they lived on prairie chickens, you know, and granddad, oh, he loved prairie chickens. He told me how good they tasted and everything. But you know, you don't see prairie chickens very much anymore. They're kind of gone.
He ate them all.
I guess that's it. Yeah.
We
But,
won't tell the government who ate them.
So your great grandfather stuffed all those things, or your
Yes,
great-grandfather
yes, he
his
did.
own
Yeah, he
journey or whatever you
he
guys-
stuffed.
Did he
them,
collect the butterflies too?
Yes.
Yes.
And mount
Yeah.
them himself?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
They
see,
was from
my
all
great
over the world.
Did they get them from, oh, really? From
They-
all over the
everywhere.
world? Oh.
my granddad told me that, you know, my great grandfather worked really hard for a part of his life, and then after that he started hiring people to come in and do the farming and do everything. And he was kind of a night owl. So what he would do, he would sleep late in the morning, and then at night he would work on his projects, you know that. And he had all kinds of stuff, you
He had
know.
a whole museum himself.
Yes.
It was beautiful.
And it's just such a shame, you know, when the house burned and
I
you
don't
know,
watch
and-
any pictures of it.
Don't know. I was thinking today, I was trying to find Mom's album, and I thought, where did I put that? Surely she's got some pictures of something.
yeah. Well, I'd love to have that. One other thing that he did is he got the first generator out there. Do you remember that? It was in the house where the hired hands slept, and it was on a cement block. Cement block's still there, by the way. And this 4-cycle generator engine, 4-cylinder generator engine was there, and it had a big crank, and you had to crank it, and it run. I'm not sure whether it ran off kerosene or gas, but I remember that. And then later on, when I was a kid, everybody decided to get into the sheep business. And so my dad, the Patchins, the Kleins, you know, we had sheep. And we had people coming in shearing those sheep. And these people were from Garden City. And, you know, their clippers were electric, so they talked Dad into selling the generator to them so they could go take it and have electricity wherever they were shearing sheep. But yeah, I remember that, and you might remember this too, Dorothy. My dad had his first horse that he rode to school to Corona, and the horse was named Dime because it turns on a dime. And
I've heard about that.
yeah, and we had a hired hand there that loved horses once, and he caught Dime, and I got to ride him. And so, I mean, he turned me loose. He led Dime, but I was on him. So, yeah.
Your dad was good to me. When I was real little, we'd come to Jetmore once in a while. I'd get out of the car and sneak into the beer joint and I'd go up to Lee, and I'd tell him that we was so poor and didn't have nothing, and he'd give me a quarter. Now, Mom and Dad never found out about this until after I was married. He wouldn't tell on me, and I told him all the problems we had, and so he'd give me a quarter, and then I'd go back and I'd say, "Can we go to the movie?" Dad says, "We ain't got money for a movie." And I'd give him a quarter. "Where'd you get it?" "I don't know." So we got to go to the movie because that was a nickel. So he took good care of me.
Yeah, he was just my world, you know, and
He was so tall and them big boots he had on.
How old was your granddad when he died?
my
Or the
great grandfather.
Yeah.
I think he was 72, I
Did I
believe.
miss that part?
73 or 74?
74,
74, I
74.
think.
He was 74.
I think,
Yeah.
And what did he die from?
I am not sure, but now this is something that my grandfather told me, and I'll share with you. But when back in those days, they didn't have pills for pain pills, and so they used alcohol. And so, anyway, my grandfather, I guess, was in quite a bit of pain, and they went to the cabinet to get the alcohol, and it was gone. And Frank got the alcohol, Granddad's brother, and had drank it. And so that was a very disturbing thing to my granddad, you know. And so I was trying to think of the doctor's name, and I hadn't thought of. But anyway, he was a loved doctor here in Kansas, or in Jetmore, and he rode out there on his horse, and but he didn't make it in time. And there was probably not a lot he could do, you know, because my great grandfather was going down and down and down, and then that's when they said, "You need to go to the hospital." He didn't want to go, but they actually talked him into it, and so he went. And then he was in the hospital, I don't know, maybe maybe even a month. And that's when he wrote the letter to my granddad. And anyway, he did come home. And so, but I just think about how it must have been back then. You know, they, in the piece that I wrote, you know, it talked about being, you know, 17 miles or whatever. Now it's 21 miles if you follow the road. But there weren't roads back then. Yeah. But anyway, I would have given anything to know my great grandfather. And sadly, I don't know much about my great grandmother. I know that she was a very hard worker. She did the gardening. She cooked for the hired men. And she did all the washing, and she probably would have liked to have had me there to burn the washing, the house down, so she would have to wash.
You know, you brought up your great grandmother again. I had a question on that. So you said she was the first school teacher,
Yeah.
but that's a long ways away from Jetmore. So did she live here during the school year or something?
I have a listing, John. I have a listing. In fact, if in that room there, I should have brought it out, but there's a map, Hodgeman County, and it has all of our country schools. Okay, and also with me, I brought with me, John. I'll give you a copy. It has the dates of the country schools and when they started. Most of them are around 1880. Most of the country schools that started around the earlier ones started in 1880. And so I have a list, and then the names don't always kind of tell you where it's at. So in that map in there, we put down, the ladies in the Register of Deeds helped me, and Marcia put this together, and it shows where each one's located. But I think you'd enjoy taking a look at those dates
So
and
she was
stuff.
at
So
a
we might coincide. I know there was a Mrs. Gordon, but this would have been a Mrs. Jackson, well,
No, her name was Gordon.
okay,
Last
this is
name was
it.
Gordon.
I got it right here. I've got a little story on that. In fact, that very thing. Yeah.
So she was at a country school then?
Well, now, she taught some different places, but this Mrs. Gordon also taught probably the first country school in Jetmore, and it was in a dugout at I'm thinking as I read it, just across the bridge that we have now that you guys come into town on. And it's a Mrs. Gordon. In fact, the guy that wrote that was a guy by the name of Andy Myers. And they go way, way back, because he died and then as he's writing this, he wrote it in 56 before he passed. And so he was talking about 81 years ago or whatever. But it's a Mrs. Gordon that he's talked about. So that would have been her.
Yeah,
And it talked about one of the earlier teachers in Hodgeman County.
yeah. And my granddad was named after her. His name was Lee Gordon Jackson. And so he was such a precious thing to me, such a precious thing. I named my son after him, his exact name, Lee Gordon Jackson. And then when my daughter came along, I named her Lisa. So
This is Mrs. Ella Gordon.
Alan Gordon.
Ella Gordon. Here's a write-up on Mrs. Ella Gordon. You never know who's coming or what's going to ask. So I was carrying my portfolio and all it that I used at school last year.
Okay. Is there anything else that I
No, just
answer? No. Well, do you have something?
yeah. I just going to add one more thing. It kind of goes together about what you said.
By the way, there's some coffee back there and some other refreshments, and Roland will be here for a little bit probably if you have some other questions. No, we talked about going out to Camp Wilderness, right?
Yes.
When the weather's kind of conducive. Also out there's another project that we were kind of looking at. Some of us, we know that Kitterville School, that's right there, Kitterville, it's probably one of the last stone country schools still halfway standing.
It is.
And we talked the other night, Lance and I, talking about trying to get a project together to get a roof put on that place, okay, and do some work on the windows before it falls in. Because I think it is. I've been trying to do some research to see, but we've got some places that we've got maybe we could get some help on some materials and stuff. So anybody that's interested, there's a lot of families that are connected with that Kitterville school, and that's why I brought it up, because of the locale of it.
And something's going to have to be done fairly quickly because
the side of the corner, I guess it would be the northwest corner, is cracked and
Coming down.
It's about to come down, and so anyway, something needs to be done fairly quickly. So that would be fun to
I
get
would
that.
love that. I'd be out there every day with you.
I tell you what, a lot of the, one of the things about the schools back then, they had slats, and then they put plaster, and then they painted plaster black, and that was a chalkboard. And so, the biggest problem that I saw, and it just broke my heart, but people would come in and vandalize it,
Yes.
and so that inside the floors are pretty eat up with, I don't know whether, the floor would have to be replaced. It's kind of unsafe, but, I'd love that, yeah.
What we were talking about right now, Roland, is just to get the roof on it and then
Save
cover
it.
the windows for right now,
Right.
just to keep the weather out.
Yeah.
Get a start there. So hopefully we can pass the word, and anybody that's interested, if you can contact Lance or I, we'll go from there. Well, folks, it's been a good afternoon. God bless you all for hanging in here. And Roland, this might be, it won't be once in a lifetime, because you'll be back, I know that. But we really appreciate Roland coming forward to do that. When I asked him about this, and he was excited, so we really appreciate you taking the time. Hodgeman County history, thanks for everyone being here. And like I said, Roland will probably drink a cup of coffee or something, so if you have some questions. Allison, anything that you wanted to add?
Well, I just should add that, if you have some program suggestions, we're
Yes.
open and
Absolutely.
for ideas that might interest the community. January is kind of a cold month, but if we started February, March,
we
and
talked
get in
about that at our
April,
board meeting,
that would
yeah.
be good times to
You
kind of
bet.
schedule
Good
Sunday afternoon.
education. Seems like Sunday afternoon works probably as well as any afternoon.
Yes, now
when we
maybe
do-
this is too early for some people, maybe 3
Yeah.
o'clock Sunday would be better.
Yeah,
But in the wintertime, that gets darker and darker, so. Anyway, there's no perfect time, but be thinking, and if you have some ideas, why, tell John
You
or
bet.
myself or Lance or,
Yeah.
Susan. And, I think we have more talent around than we realize, and we got more stories around than we utilize. So it's a good thing to look locally for things.
You bet. All right.
I did find the cattle trails book back here that shows the cattle trails through Hodgeman County. And
One of the maps, I think, we have in here has that,
Yeah.
I think that's
Uh-huh.
hanging up.
yeah, so,
Every time I come in here, I see something different that I've been in here a lot of times. So thanks again for coming and hanging with us. And Lance, thanks for running this video is going to be saved and for future use. So people that I know there's some folks that couldn't be here today, so maybe we can find a way to make that available. Thanks a lot. God bless everybody for coming out.